Okay. So we are now recording and the meeting is underway, and I am actually going to turn it over to Janet Aaron, the supervisor for the town of Skaneateles. Janet, you can unmute yourself, right? And you have your camera on.
Yep, I'm here, Aaron. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, if you just want to say a few words, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, good. So give you a little background on this, how we came to this point and the 9-element watershed plan. In 2018, Paul Teresi, who is the president of the Skaneateles Lake Association, requested that the town of Skaneateles sponsor a grant application for the development of this plan in conjunction with Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. The grant was successfully awarded in the amount of $235,650. The grant required a 25% match that was provided both by SLA in the amount of $60,000 and the town of Skaneateles in the amount of $18,000. The grant included $106,400 to collect lake and tributary water quality data. Kathy Bertusch, Chief Executive with Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board, was in charge of writing and managing the grant for the town. Then COVID hit, and like many businesses, government agencies slowed down as employees were required to work remotely, and receiving the funding was greatly delayed. In order to keep the project moving forward, County Executive Ryan McMahon and County Legislator Julie Abbott agreed to support a loan from the Onondaga County Economic Development in the amount of $106,400 without interest, which was amazing for the town, in order for the collection of lake and tributary monitoring to continue. We greatly appreciate the support we received from the county for this. And by the way, the town has returned that money to them. Then in September 2021, Kathy Bertusch retired from Central New York Regional Planning Board, and this was a huge loss to the progress that had been made. But fortunately, in March of this year, Aaron McKean was named the new Environmental Program Manager at Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. While he has had big shoes to fill, Aaron has done an amazing job of working to move this forward, communicating with all parties and making sure that the public is informed about exactly what the plan hopes to accomplish. So thank you, Aaron. Today at the meeting, we also have Mark Tucker, who's on the town board, and I know that Camille Marquette is here from Onondaga County Cooperative Extension, and Amy Klinkhammer from the New York State DEC. I'm sure I'm missing people, but those are the ones that I'm seeing right now. So thank you, Aaron. I'll turn it back over to you.
That unmute button. Janet, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a great introduction. Great background on the history of the project. And I should have done this before, but just a quick orientation to what we're doing. This is, of course, the Zoom interface that we're all in. I'm sure that you've all used this before. This meeting is being recorded. You probably got that notification when you logged in. And there will be a question and answer session following the presentation. And we're going to use the chat function in Zoom to get your questions. So you can, depending on how it goes, how many questions there are, we may be able to take some live, but it would be great as the presentation is going along, if you can just use the chat window. That interface should be at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to open a chat window and pop your questions right in there, and then we'll go through those following the presentation. All right, so just to give you a little bit of background on the project team, that's the town of Skaneateles holds the grant from the Department of State that funds my side of this project. So the town of Skaneateles is really the lead on this. My office is doing the project management. Lauren Darcy and Tom Barnett couldn't join us tonight, but they've been involved and are helping out with some of the public involvement components. From Department of State, we've got Catherine Hogel, a coastal resources specialist, who is, I believe, on the call tonight. And from DEC, we have Amy Klinkhammer from the Finger Lakes Water Hub, and Karen Hansen from the Division of Water in Albany, who's an environmental program specialist. We also have, kind of unique to this project and this process, we have a whole separate modeling team that's running the watershed model and an in-lake model that's being funded and coordinated through the New York State Office of General Services. You're going to hear from Tony Elinardo, the project manager for the modeling team, in a little bit. He's with Ramble, and Liz Moran from Ecologic couldn't be here, but we do have Jasmine Jones from Ecologic. We also have Dave Matthews from the Upstate Freshwater Institute, who's developing what we're referring to as the in-lake model, a model that represents conditions inside Skaneateles Lake, and Chelsea Bowles running the watershed model, sort of the land use side model, a model simulating conditions all around the lake. So in addition to the sort of the core, modeling team and the project team, there's also a large watershed advisory committee. It's made up of 24 organizations. It's watershed municipalities, nonprofit organizations, Cornell Cooperative Extension, just a large group of stakeholders that's intended to represent the community's interests on this project. This is intended to be a community and stakeholder-driven watershed planning process. But of course, we can't really have public meetings at every turn of the road, every time a decision needs to be made about how to proceed with the planning process. We can't really literally go to the public every single time. It's an unwieldy process. So as a proxy, the Watershed Advisory Committee represents the community and will be helping to guide the process as we go along, developing the vision and goals for the project, and helping to develop some of the best management practices that we'll talk about a little bit later. All right, so my job is to kind of orient you to the planning process, the big picture stuff, like why are we here tonight? So I'm going to give you sort of an overview of the 9-element plan, and Tony's going to really flesh that out. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the status of Skaneateles Lake, some of the key indicators for the lake's water quality and overall health. We're going to talk a little bit about existing watershed protections. Tony's going to give you some background on the modeling side of things. Then we're going to have our question and answer component. Then we're going to get your input on the draft vision statements and set of goal areas for the lake and the watershed. So that's a thumbnail sketch of the evening. Just to kind of give you an orientation. So as I say, my job is to kind of give you the big picture stuff. So I like to start with, what is a watershed? For those of you who may not know, everybody lives in a watershed. There's really nothing special about saying you live in a watershed. It's just all of the land area that drains to a common body of water, like a stream, a lake, a bay, or the ocean. And the thing that's central to the planning process is that whatever water, whatever rain falls on the ground or precipitation that falls on the ground, whatever doesn't soak into the ground becomes runoff, and it carries whatever's on the surface or underground. It carries soil and pollutants and other materials from the land into the water body, rivers, lakes, and bays. So our everyday activities affect downstream waters. So that land use and land cover become central to the question of watershed planning. When we talk about the watershed plan, we're really not focused on in-lake activities or in-lake recreation. That can be a part of water quality overall, but the watershed planning process is intended to figure out issues and opportunities in the watershed itself. So all of the land use and land cover, all in the watershed, which can contribute to the overall water quality. One of the things that I like about this little simple graphic is it gives you the picture of the watershed, but it doesn't provide you any municipal boundaries. Like you don't get a sense of how the municipalities overlap with the watershed, because the municipal boundaries generally are not drawn with a watershed in mind. The result being that a watershed plan has to span municipal boundaries. And it typically is a partnership between several towns, towns and counties. In this case, we have a few different counties involved, several towns. So it makes it a little bit different from a normal, say, like town level or even a county level comprehensive planning process. And again, it's really focused on how the land use and land cover in that watershed affect the water quality. That's the central hub of it. We're not, again, we're not, there are a lot of things that we can safely leave out of this process, even as we look at it from a comprehensive planning perspective. But really we're focused on, what are the opportunities to improve water quality through improvements in the watershed. We look at that, we consider social, economic, natural processes as part of that, which makes it, a project that involves lots of players, all trying to focus on what's best for the overall water quality. Some quick data points on the Skaneateles Lake watershed. As I said, it involves a few counties, portions of Cayuga County, Cortland County, and Onondaga County, portions of 7 different towns, and of course the village of Skaneateles. The overall watershed area is just under 60 square miles, which is fairly substantial, but the population is relatively small, just around 4,200 residents in around 3,000 dwelling units. And some of those dwelling units are only used seasonally. So it's, it's a largely undeveloped watershed area. Another thing that's important to note is the ratio of the total watershed area to the lake surface. So the watershed is roughly 4 times the size of the lake surface itself, which is relatively small. If you look at some of the other Finger Lakes, Owasco Lake has a 20-to-1 ratio, Canandaigua Lake a 10-to-1 ratio. So you're talking about a much larger watershed area. That's one of the advantages that Skaneateles Lake has, is that we're not talking about, like Oneida Lake has a watershed area that's roughly the size of Rhode Island. So when you talk about land use in that area, or you talk about, water quality issues, that can bring up all kinds of things. In Skaneateles Lake, we're talking about a relatively compact area, which is beneficial to overall water quality. And to give you an idea of what the land cover is in the watershed, it's about 40% agricultural use. So this map here, just pull up the legend here. So that brownish color is cultivated crops. You see that on kind of the northwestern side, the northeastern side. But the south side of the lake is largely different kinds of forest. So it's about 50%, just under 50% of the watershed is forested, and very little, about 10%, is developed. So homes, businesses, parking lots, streets, areas with permanent man-made structures don't take up a lot of area within the watershed proportionally. It's about, like I say, about 10%. So these are advantages that the Skaneateles Lake watershed has over some other watersheds in the region. Just to give you some information on Skaneateles Lake itself, 16 miles long, it's 1.5 miles wide at its widest, about 3/4 of a mile wide on average, has an overall volume of 413 billion gallons of water, maximum depth 315 feet, about 145, 150 feet on average. And of course, Skaneateles Lake is the unfiltered water source for the city of Syracuse, which, as we will discuss, has a lot of implications for how the watershed is managed and how, what the requirements are for the quality of the water. Just as a side note, 9 billion gallons of water are discharged through the dam at the northern end of the lake every year. And the hydraulic retention time, this is another thing to kind of think about. The hydraulic retention time, it's a rough estimate of the amount of time a hypothetical water molecule sits in a lake. So it's based on a formula. It's based on the lake's total volume and the rates of inflow and outflow. So, it's a rough estimate of how long some water stays in the lake. But the thing that's important about that is that means that the lake's changes to the lake happen slowly. It's not like you can make a dramatic change to the lake this year and then see exactly what happened as a result. But I should say to the watershed, you can't change something in the watershed and then see a change, very quickly. It's going to take time for that to be seen, which is one of the reasons that the modeling that Tony's going to talk about is so important, because the modeling can give you a peek into the future, a sneak preview of the effects of a given change on the watershed side to the lake's water quality. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go ahead here. Another kind of fundamental concept to get out there is this idea of nutrients. So what we're talking about with a 9-element plan are, we're talking about pollutants. So it's all about controlling pollutants. Now, in the case of Skaneateles Lake, there really are not industrial pollutants in any great amount to worry about. We're not talking about, say, PCBs or mercury. What we're focused on are phosphorus and nitrogen more than anything else, because they are nutrients. They occur naturally. They can also come from man-made uses, but they're pivotal to life in a lake. They're the base of, sort of the structure of the food web in a lake. So plants and animals need phosphorus and nitrogen to grow, but too much phosphorus and nitrogen can throw the ecosystem out of balance. And so in other lakes, usually smaller lakes, you'll get an overload of nutrients, and it can promote an overabundance of algae that can be bad for all aquatic life. So it's a case of too much of a good thing can become a problem. So in the case of Skaneateles Lake, what we're focused on more than anything else are nutrients, which aren't technically a pollutant, but the problem is that, again, too much in excess, they could be problematic. So when we talk about nutrients, that's the reason why it's connected to algae growth. And again, the status of Skaneateles Lake is quite good. It's got a AA water quality rating. It is considered oligotrophic, which, as you can see here on the far right of or far left of the screen, that's a clear lake. It's abundant in oxygen, relatively low in plant nutrients. Skaneateles Lake, I believe, is one of the few Finger Lakes that's considered oligotrophic. I think the other Finger Lakes might be, they might have slightly less good water quality. I'm not positive about that, but I think that's true. Overall, the clarity of Skaneateles Lake is very high, and the total phosphorus is very low. I am sure that it has lower phosphorus levels than the other Finger Lakes. It's also got lower chlorophyll A levels, which are kind of an indicator for algae growth. As you can see, a eutrophic lake, that's kind of the classification for a lake that has a lot of algae on it. And Skaneateles Lake is at the other end of the spectrum. Of course, in the middle, it's mesotrophic, kind of in the middle. All right, so high water quality is no accident. It's taken decades of effort by a lot of players, including the towns and village of Skaneateles and other municipalities around the lake that have implemented zoning and other development controls, such as site plan review. The city of Syracuse, as the controls the drinking water supply and the rules and regulations that go with that. So that means a lot of monitoring of the lake's quality. It also means the city plays a very active role in talking about development along the lake and around the lake, doing septic tank inspections around the lake. There's a wide variety of activities that the city of Syracuse undertakes to protect the water and promoting water quality projects around the lake. The filtration avoidance waiver that the city has requires a great deal of monitoring and water sampling on a daily basis. The city of Syracuse also funds the Skaneateles Lake Watershed Agricultural Program, which began in 1994 and is administered by the Onondaga County Soil and Water Conservation District. This is essentially a program to ensure that agricultural uses in the watershed are using the best possible techniques to ensure that the water that's coming out of farms is as high in quality as it can be. So that the Soil and Water Conservation District uses what they call whole farm plans to try to promote water quality and work with farmers. Over the years, they've helped farmers implement over 381 best management practices in the watershed. 91% of the farmland around the lake in the watershed is enrolled in these whole farm plans, which focus on, again, promoting water quality. Other protections for Skaneateles Lake, the Skaneateles Lake Association has been extremely active in promoting invasive species management and in implementing watershed improvement projects. The Central New York Land Trust and the Finger Lakes Land Trust have been using purchase of development rights and conservation easements to try to restrict or reduce development around the lake. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Finger Lakes Water Hub has been active in all of the Finger Lakes and particularly Skaneateles Lake to promote water quality and water quality actions. The HABS monitoring and reporting program helps to ensure that we know when and where harmful algal blooms are occurring. Cornell Cooperative Extension promotes public education on water quality and lake-friendly living. And the Skaneateles Watershed Municipal Partnership is a partnership, just as the name suggests, of the municipalities in the watershed to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what's going on with the lake. And again, promoting projects and other activities to help protect the lake. All right, so that's an overview of the watershed, Skaneateles Lake, the watershed plan, the planning process. To give you a quick idea of what the project schedule is, we have a fairly aggressive schedule for this project. Here we are in June. We are on public meeting number 1. We are anticipating a second public meeting and a third public meeting. We will be doing a total of 3 public meeting opportunities. We hope to be doing that second public meeting in October and the third public meeting in this winter, December or January. In between there, we have got tons of work to do. That Watershed Advisory Committee that I referenced earlier has to talk about a wide variety of things, including, as I said, the vision and goals, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the meeting, best management practices. We've got to develop a watershed characterization report. All of these things will come back in front of you as members of the public in that October meeting. And again, when we are in the position to start talking about, final recommendations, that's the content for public meeting number 3. So as I say, it's fairly aggressive. We got a lot of work to do, but we have a great team. And well, okay, I guess I wanted to just take a step back and say why this plan. This is a non-regulatory planning process. The real goal of this process is to get all of the stakeholders together, get that Watershed Advisory Committee talking, and then try to develop a set of projects and recommendations for improving the lake that's going to be based on mathematical models that simulate future conditions. That's really the thing that makes the 9-element process different from some other watershed planning processes, is that the modeling is there to kind of lend, a scientific basis to the recommendations. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who's going to explain that modeling side of the equation.
Hey, thanks, Aaron. And thanks again to all for your time participating here this evening. So just a reminder, the modeling piece of this effort is led up by New York State DEC and the New York State Office of General Services. And myself, Tony Alnardo, I'm the project manager overall at Ramble. You might have known our former company, O'Brien and Gear Engineers. We're again managing the project with Upstate Freshwater Institute leading up the lake modeling effort, and another company, Limotech, leading up leading up the watershed modeling. Over the next few slides, I'll just give you a brief summary of the role of mathematical modeling in the 9EP, or the 9 elements plan. I'll tell you a bit about the models that are being used and give you some examples of what this will look like in practice through the 9 elements planning process. Just some important key messages here right up front that I'll try and come back to as we go through the slides. Again, the models that we're talking about, these are computer-based mathematical models. They're not a physical kind of built model of the watershed, but these rely on computer simulations of the lake and the watershed. As Aaron alluded to, the models play a key supporting role. There's several other important elements to the 9 elements process overall. And again, the modeling is intended to support them, and it does that really by helping to develop an understanding the lake and the watershed processes, and to try and help us understand the results of potential management actions. For Skaneateles Lake, one of the key processes, as you might expect, is phosphorus inputs to the lake and the lake's biological response to that input. A lot of effort has gone into customizing these models based on local data and knowledge, so that these models represent, to the extent practicable, reality and become useful tools for, again, evaluating different management scenarios. And that's really leads to the last point here, is that ultimately the modeling will simply help to set management priorities and develop reasonable goals for this 9 element planning process. Okay, Aaron, next slide, please. So Aaron's talked a lot about the 9 elements plan. Well, here are the actual 9 elements to the plan. They're shown here on the screen. So the 9 elements plan comprises efforts to quantify the pollutant sources to the lake, to set pollutant reduction goals, identify best management practices to help achieve those goals. Then knowing what those management practices are, there's an implementation plan, including scheduling, funding, and measurements of progress, 3 additional elements there. And then ultimately selecting evaluation criteria, conducting the modeling. All of these things are then overall governed by input from stakeholders. Okay, so that's the overall scope of the 9 elements plan. Again, talking now about the modeling, the elements kind of highlighted here with the red dashed outline. These are the key areas where the modeling will come into play. Okay, we'll be using the modeling initially to help, again, understand and where the sources of pollution, in particular phosphorus loading, is coming from, and get a quantitative sense of that. All right, then with that understanding in hand, then we can go on to say, okay, well, what's a reasonable goal to try and achieve in terms of reductions? And then use the modeling to identify different management scenarios to achieve those goals. And ultimately, again, based on the modeling, understand what the different types and sources of pollution there are to the lake, be able to identify important evaluation criteria. One other, I think, important point here is that, some folks might look at this a bit cynically and say, oh, well, what do we need these models for? We already know, generally what the issues are. We just need to get out and start doing stuff. Well, these lake and watershed systems are complex. Okay, and the modeling will help us again evaluate these potential management scenarios in a way that we might not be able to. Again, as Aaron referred to earlier on, it might take several years for the lake to potentially respond to different management scenarios, and we might find that the lake responds in ways that we weren't expecting. And so the modeling kind of helps us sort that out in a more efficient, desirable time frame. All right, and why don't you go on to the next slide? All right, so starting on the watershed side, introduction to the watershed model here. We're using what's called SWOT, the soil and water assessment tool. As I mentioned before, this work is being done in collaboration with Lumnichuk and the modeler there, Chelsea Bowles. And again, SWOT is a watershed modeling tool, okay? And what it does is it looks to simulate the flow of water and nutrients across the landscape, and ultimately is helpful in kind of identifying or working up non-point source pollution, understanding different land management practices, as well as climate change on again, the flow of water and nutrients across the landscape. The model is developed by Texas A&M and USDA. It's a very credible model. It's been used in a lot of different situations. And the nice thing here again is that we can, the model itself is in the public domain, so anybody can download it and use it. In this case, we've downloaded it and are customizing it with data and observations from the Skaneateles Lake watershed to make this again as representative as possible. Just a sneak peek as to what we've achieved so far. Currently, there's a preliminary model that we're working through at the moment for the watershed. It has the watershed broken down into about what we call 60 sub-watersheds. So that essentially covers just about all the major tributaries to Skaneateles Lake, and in some cases, those tributaries are broken up into some headwaters and lower reaches in order to get a better handle of what's going on. All right, Aaron, next slide, please. So this slide just gives you a quick summary here of what data, again, goes into the SWOT model in order to customize it for the Skaneateles Lake watershed. There's a topographic a model here called the digital elevation model that essentially provides, again, the topography, the lay of the land that's important for how water flows through the landscape. The model accounts for land use and land cover, local meteorology, hydrology, again, water flow, both over the surface and through the ground, stream flow data, stream water quality data, soil types, cropping information. So we work with the Soil Water Conservation District to identify relevant cropping practices for the watershed, and then where appropriate, livestock information as well. Important to note here too that septic systems and lawn care practices are being evaluated as a part of this effort as well. Okay, and as it relates to some of these data sets which occur over time, like meteorology, typically we're using about 10 years of data to set the foundation for the watershed model. Okay, next slide, Aaron. Okay, now for the lake model. The lake model here is called C=W2. It's a little bit of a wonky name there. This was developed by the federal government, and like SWOT, this model, the model framework is in the public domain, and our team has acquired that model and framework, and again customized it with local Skaneateles Lake data and observations in order to again make it reflect reality to the extent possible. And again, the folks doing that work is Upstate Freshwater Institute. They've done several of these other models for in Central New York, for example, over in Cayuga and Owasco Lakes. And so what you see on the screen here, this is Skaneateles Lake, and all these little blue lines here. These are what's called the different model segments. And so the way the model works is that all the different inputs and outputs of lake processes are computed in each one of these segments, and then the inputs and outputs can also go back and forth amongst them. Right? C=W2, kind of the way it's set up and works, it works very well for long linear systems such as Finger Lakes. So the model's well fit to Skaneateles Lake, and as I said before, it's also been used successfully over at Cayuga and Owasco. Next slide, Aaron. And like the SWOT model, the C=W2 lake model needs a variety of data sets, both on the physical, chemical, and biological attributes. That's an important point that I didn't make in the last slide is that one of the nice things about C equal W2 is it not only models the physical processes of the lake, but also the biological response. So and the inputs of some of the lake biology, like how mussels affect the lake nutrient processes as well. Now, as Aaron alluded to earlier on in the presentation here, you know, the Skaneateles Lake has a relatively long residence time, about, you know, roughly, you know, 16, 20 years of a turnover time or of residence time of water in the lake. And so in order to accommodate or address that appropriately, the lake team is using a minimum of 20 years of meteorological data to model that full cycle, if you will, of the lake. Okay, Aaron, next slide, please. So once these lake and watershed models have been set up, you know, we've got the data needed to customize them locally to the Skaneateles Lake watershed and the lake itself. Then both teams go through processes of what's called calibration and validation. Okay, and so what calibration means is that we take the model and adjust the different settings within it to make it so that the model predictions, or what the model says about phosphorus runoff, for example, it matches reality, the things that we're actually measuring and comparing the model predictions to. Okay, so we go through that calibration process for both the watershed and the in-lake. That process is governed by what's called a quality assurance project plan that has to be reviewed and approved by several folks at the state. And it follows sort of a federal guideline to the structure of the quality plan as well. After that calibration process is complete, there's still another quality step here that we call verification. What that is we take that calibrated model, we feed it some new observations that are based on reality. And again, we compare, but these are observations that haven't been used yet in the setup of the model. And we see if the model, again, creates predictions that match to the extent practicable with reality. All right, so there's several steps here that we go through to you know, assure the extent practicable the quality of these models in what they tell us about the reality of the lake and watershed system. The nice thing being is that once we have that set up again, then we can move on and start to test out different management scenarios and really help inform this whole process about where the best bang for your buck options are for achieving the lake water quality goals. Okay, next slide, Aaron. So with that in mind, now I'm just going to share a few examples of how these models work and the role that they can play in this overall 9EP lake process. So this first example shows how the watershed modeling can be used to characterize nutrient pollution or nutrient inputs to the lake from throughout a watershed, and start to focus attention where management practices may be needed. So what you're looking at here on the screen, this was a SWOT model completed by the firm Anchor QEA as a part of the Seneca-Cuca 9 elements planning process. And so what specifically you see on the right side is again, Seneca Lake and Cuca Lake there, in those different subdivided areas, the different color, different orange colors there are the different subwatersheds around Seneca, Cuca Lake. The darker oranges there are areas of relatively high phosphorus loading rate on an acre basis. So what you can gather from this heat map, as they call it, is not only kind of the locations of where the nutrient loading is coming from, but then you can also do a little digging and understand what might be the related sources of nutrients may be. And what's interesting about this this situation is that a few of these darker orange watersheds are associated with things you might expect: development, agriculture practices or heavier rates of agriculture. But in other cases, it's on the south end of the lake in particular, those are areas of relatively steep and erosive soils that are also contributing to the phosphorus contributing to this to Seneca Lake ultimately. So you know, this example kind of illustrates the importance of both the environmental setting, but also and human use impacts. And again, where to ultimately start focusing your management options. All right, next slide. Aaron. And Aaron, why don't you just kind of key it forward a few and show this whole table? It's easier to talk through that way, I think. Thank you. So what this table is showing here, folks, this is an example of how the SWOT modeling can be used to account for climate change when developing nutrient reduction targets. All right, so what you see here on the table is, again, it's from that same Seneca-Cuca watershed model. You know, so each one of those different orange areas here that you saw on the last slide, they're shown here now in the table as different rows here. Those are different sub-watersheds again. And you can see associated with each of the different sub-watersheds is the amount of phosphorus loading estimated to the lake. Now, what the anchor team was able to do through the SWOT model was say, okay, you know, what would the phosphorus loading look like if there's a 10% increase in precipitation? That level of increase may be consistent with some future, you know, climate change type scenarios. And you can see those percentages there listed, give you a sense that, gosh, you know, there's going to be some substantial increases in phosphorus loading potentially based on the model, just associated with that increase in precipitation. All right, so understanding that climate change may have this effect in that system, then the team could look at, okay, how much phosphorus reduction were we hoping to achieve? And then ultimately what the net reduction would look like, again, with an understanding of the role of climate change. Okay, so again, this similar type of scenario, you know, could be applied to other lakes if there is a concern about climate change and the role that increased precipitation rates may pose. Okay, Aaron, next slide. All right, here's just another example. This one shows how the SWOT watershed model can be used to help predict outcomes of adopting nutrient management plans for farms in the watershed. So this is an example from the Owasco Lake Marine Elements Plan, right, and developed by the Cuyahoga County Soil and Water Conservation District in Cornell. So what you're looking at here, this is a figure of total phosphorus loads to Owasco Lake from the various subwatersheds around Owasco. The bar all the way to the right, Owasco Lake. What that means, that's just area. This is loading from areas that directly run off to the lake itself. Okay, the blue bars show what the baseline or what the existing conditions amount of phosphorus loading is to the lake. And then based on evaluation of the SWOT model, then we can get a sense of how much total phosphorus load reduction we get when implementing the nutrient management plans for the farms and the watersheds. You can see, for example, Dutch Hollow Brook, 27% load reduction, and all of Mill Creek, for example, 24% direct runoff to Owasco Lake, a 29% reduction in total phosphorus load by implementing the nutrient management plans. Okay, so again, this helps give the community a sense of what may be achievable through different management actions. Okay, Aaron, next slide, please. And yeah, thank you. And just key it right ahead to the next part too, Aaron. There were the class. Yes, thank you. So folks, now this slide now takes the loading information from the watershed. Now we're looking at the lake. And so what you're seeing here, this is a plot that shows how lake water quality targets can be evaluated by simulating the various watershed load reductions or other stressors like again, temperature change with climate change. So on the right side of the screen, you can see here total phosphorus. This is concentration in Owasco Lake, and there's a base case there, and you can see just some examples there of what a 30% TP total phosphorus load reduction would look like in terms of, again, of total phosphorus in the lake, and then also that same scenario with a 2-degree bump in temperature. Same type of layout there on the right, just looking at chlorophyll instead. Really the take-home point here about this slide is that those TP reductions are effective at again, holding the line, as it were, for that Class AA drinking water target, even with consideration of a potential 2% or 2°C bump in temperature. All right, so an example here of the lake model being used again to help understand different scenarios and what the response of the lake would be in terms of total phosphorus concentration and chlorophyll. Okay, and then next slide, Aaron. Okay, and so this slide is laid out similarly than the last one, but there's a different variable here that the Owasco Lake water quality model is looking at. In this case, it's cyanobacteria. As you may know, cyanobacteria are the bacteria associated with HABs, and so it's nice advantage of the C-equal W2 model to be able to evaluate cyanobacteria as well. What you can see is that there's a base case level of cyanobacteria. The 30% load reduction slightly reduces the cyanobacteria average concentration on Owasco Lake, which is a good thing. But one of the surprising things that you see here, as predicted by the C-equal W2 model, is that 30%, the benefits of that 30% load reduction in total phosphorus is offset by a 2% increase in temperature. So you see on the right side here, that gray bar jumping way up, showing that there's that 2°C increase in air temperature is associated with an increase in the cyanobacteria concentration. Now, bear in mind, this prediction here isn't saying there's going to be more blooms. It's just giving an estimate of the concentration, the effect of the 2°C increase in air temperature and the concentration of cyanobacteria. Bottom line here, what this figure suggests is that the climate change, this 2°C increase in air temperature, these are things that are difficult for us here to control locally, right? There are certain things we can all do, but the overall climate stress is something that's beyond the reach of our watershed alone. And so that what this really all means is that we need to make sure to control the things where we can and to focus, where possible on best management practices throughout the watershed to limit as many possible other ways that we can to prevent growth of cyanobacteria. All right, so that was just kind of a quick summary there of the background here of the modeling and a few examples here. As we go forward, we'll be working with Aaron here to continue, sharing progress on the development of the modeling. So with that, I'll kick it back over to Aaron. And thank you.
Cool, Tony. Thank you so much. That was great. Yeah, great tour of the modeling and what the modeling can do for the planning process. All right, so this is your chance to ask questions. I think we have had a couple of questions come in by way of the chat. One comment from Amanda Barber from the Cortland County Soil and Water Conservation District. She points out Cortland County Soil and Water Conservation District has an active water quality protection program, including activities in the town of Scott, like hydroseeding, stream restoration, buffer establishment, septic education and maintenance, etc. I apologize, Amanda, that is great. Yes, thank you very much. It's great to have that in there. Thanks for that input. The Cortland County Soil and Water Conservation District. I neglected to mention their great work in the watershed. Let's see, next question. I don't know, do you guys see the questions on my screen? No? Sorry, no, okay, good. All right, I'm gonna read this out and hopefully we can follow it along verbally. Understanding that this is a question about the process. Understanding that the 9E plan is non-regulatory, what is the process for acceptance or adoption of the final 9E plan? How can the 9E plan recommendations move to action by our 5 lakefront towns, plus the 2 additional ones in the watershed without lakefront, the 3 counties, 1 village, City of Syracuse, New York State, and their agencies and activities? The process results in a set of recommendations. That's the concept. The idea is not that this is an additional layer of regulations or an additional layer of control by any single entity. The advantage that the 9-element process gives you is it can help you put metrics to different project ideas or different as Amanda pointed out, for what some of the things that Cortland County is doing, hydroseeding, stream restoration, buffer establishment, septic education. These are all the kinds of programs that are going to help promote water quality and help ensure, that we're all doing what we can for the lake. None of that requires necessarily additional regulation. What it requires is additional funding. So the 9-element plan process helps all of the players unlock additional funding. It helps boost, say, applications to, say, funding entities like the Department of Environmental Conservation. And it puts real numbers to projected outcomes for the projects and best management practices that can be implemented in the watershed. So it's like I say, the phrase that I think captures it most succinctly is it's all carrot, no stick. It's all about providing additional support and additional research and science for projects and programs in the watershed. All right, next question here. This is directed for Tony. It is called out specifically for you, Tony. It says, are you measuring phosphorus loading solely at the streams designated on the map, such as Grout Brook, Shotwell Creek, etc.? And if so, how do you account for service areas that drain into all of the ravines, particularly toward the south end of the lake, that become temporary inlets during a rain event?
Good question. Thank you, William, for that. So there's a few different ways that those temporary tribs are accounted for. First off, the water quality measurements from the lake itself that for which the lake model must be calibrated to and verified against are affected by all the sources of phosphorus to the lake, including those temporary trips. So at its base level, that contribution is kind of baked into the model, even if there's not monitoring of all these different ephemeral tributaries. That being said, as I alluded to earlier on when I mentioned the SWAT model, there are 60 currently. The SWAT model is broken down into 60 different subwatersheds. That includes some of those smaller ephemeral tribs, particularly in the middle and southern portions of the lake. Each one of those subwatersheds provide quantitative estimates for loading. So that hopefully that helps address your question. That's what we've got to work with.
Good. I say this, Deborah, thank you for reminding me that everyone can see the chat. I totally forgot. Everybody can just open up the chat on their own and see what's going on. unless I missed something, we don't have anything else in the chat. Does anybody want to just unmute themselves and ask a question?
Hi, Aaron. This is Kate with Department of State. I was also just going to comment on Chris's question.
Yes,
For the approval process, so DEC and DOS will approve the plan. Part of this plan will include an assessment of local laws around the lake within the watershed. We do encourage, particularly if you're doing an update to your comp plan, that you may want to adopt the 9-element plan locally. I think that's a great idea. It's not a requirement though, because this isn't regulatory. And like Aaron was saying, projects that are identified in this plan are eligible for funding through a variety of different funding streams. And it also can help you prioritize certain practices based on its impact that we'll be able to see through the model. So it may help you spend money and apply for money more efficiently.
great. Thank you very much, Kate. All right. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Claire Howard. I have a couple questions. It seems to me I remember that the Freshwater Institute evaluated the status of the Skaneateles Lake every 2 years. Is this still being done on that schedule? And when was the last time the lake was evaluated for clarity and all of the elements they look at?
Yeah, good question. I have to admit, I don't know that one off the top of my head. Tony, do you know how recently Dave and UFI may have done some monitoring?
I believe that, I don't want to speak out of turn with Dave's work, but I believe that they were out again this year conducting monitoring.
Aaron, also the town of Skaneateles started several years ago, and probably while Claire was on the town board, paying for Upstate Freshwater to collect data on the lake. And I think it's either 2 or 3 years, Claire, I'm not sure. But that has still been in the schedule. This year, instead of putting funding toward that, we put it toward this 9-element watershed plan. But I'm not sure exactly when the last one was done by the town.
And
But
Janet, is the town still monitoring, paying for the monitoring of any tributaries?
Yes, we did several with Upstate Freshwater. We've done Shotwell, and several of this last couple of years, they were doing ones during the winter, some of the 5 tributaries. So we kind of take the guidance from Upstate Freshwater or where they feel is the best for us to monitor and to have the data on. And that's been incorporated into this 9-element watershed plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question. Let's see, did I miss something? Oh yeah, Christine asks, will the recording be available at a later time? The answer is yes. We will put this on the project website, which is, oh yeah, right here on the screen, skaneateles90.cnyrpdb.org. We will get it up there just as quick as we can. Let's see, and Frank Moses points out that SLA is still mobilizing citizen scientists as part of the QAP with DEC. Oh, that's right, everybody can see the chat. You don't need me to read that. As part of the QAP with DEC and Upstate Freshwater Institute, whether that data will be used for the 90 is not yet fully determined. Okay. All right, let's see, more questions. And of course, you can always send your questions to the project email address, scan9e@cnyrpdb.org. All right, I think we're probably good on that component of the process. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the goals and targets component of the 9-element planning process. One of the things that's going to help guide the 9-element plan is a vision statement for the lake and the watershed and a set of goals. The vision is going to be a summary of the community's idea of what you want Skaneateles Lake to look like in the future. And the goals help to fill in the vision's details. So the goals help to articulate how we move toward the vision, what aspects of the watershed people are most concerned about, where they really want this to focus. Excuse me, what are the main categories of watershed issues you think the plan should focus on? Now, kind of, you know, as we've been saying, the unique aspect of the 9-element process is it does have this very quantitative side. So there are also a special set of targets that are related to the pollutants. And that's something that will be talked about, you know, at length between the modeling team and the Watershed Advisory Committee. We'll talk about that as the process moves along. But for tonight, I'm really interested in getting input and feedback from all of you on some draft vision statements. So the 3 vision statements you see were developed by the Watershed Advisory Committee and voted on by the Watershed Advisory Committee from a selection of other vision statement ideas. But I'm really interested in your input and your take on these. So the first option is maintain the high water quality in Skaneateles Lake to ensure continued enjoyment and use of the lake for drinking water, recreation, aesthetic, economic, social, and community value. Option 2, short and sweet. Skaneateles Lake will continue to meet the highest standards of water quality for future generations. And option 3, building on a strong foundation of successful protection efforts, watershed communities will work together to ensure that Skaneateles Lake continues to meet its best uses of unfiltered drinking water, recreation, and aquatic life for future generations. So these are 3 ideas, draft ideas for vision statements. And we also have a set of goal areas. So the different categories, broad subjects that are interest to, you know, that are elements of kind of watershed planning of Skaneateles Lake. But we're interested in which of these are most important. So if you had to boil it down to just 6 of these, which is asking a lot because they're all important, but if you had to boil it down to just the top 6, which would you pick? And we're also interested in other comments that you might have on these goal areas in general. So I am actually going to turn control over to Jasmine, who is going to do a little interactive exercise. Bear with me here while I figure out how that works. Okay. All right, Jasmine, you are now the host, and Jasmine is going to run you through this Jamboard exercise, right? Yes.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron.
Great. Thanks, Jasmine.
So as Aaron said, my name is Jasmine James. I'm an environmental scientist from Ecologic. I'm here to help facilitate questions and then explain our interactive session that you see today on the screen. We'll be using a platform called Google Jamboard, which you will all be able to access via a link in the Zoom chat after I go through and explain everything to you. So we would like to receive feedback from you all on the draft vision statements and the goal areas that Aaron just showed you all. The comments in the Jamboard are live and completely anonymous. As people log on, you'll see actual random little animals pop up rather than names. We would love to hear from you all, and I will go ahead and walk you through some of the tools that we'll be using today. So if you look at my screen here, you'll see that there's a pen option as well as many other tools on this left side of the column. So first we have the pen option, which you can use to draw, which will be useful when you go through the vision statements and choose which of these options you like the best. There's also the erase tool, which you can use to erase any of your pen marks. There's the select tool, which will turn you back to your regular mouse. The fourth button below is a sticky note, which you can use to type whatever comment you'd like, and you can save it onto here. We also have the tool down here that will be our last useful tool, which is a text box, which you can also use to type in any comment and move them around. I do want to note that everyone here, once you click on this link, is an editor, so you can delete other people's comments. So please be careful and cautious not to delete other people's comments and drawings. And then finally, you'll see up here to navigate through the frames. You can either click on this to expand and see all the frames, or in a simpler term, you can go ahead and just click on these arrows to go to the next, where you can add any comments if you want to these options for the vision statements. And then finally, for the goal areas, we encourage you to pick, as Erin explained, 6 of these, and you can do so by either checking or using the text box to potentially use an X, just to click and drag where you'd like your options. And then we have a final frame for you to provide any additional comments and questions that you have as we go through these vision statements and goal areas. And with that, is there any initial questions? If not, I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat.
Perfect, Jasmine, thank you very much. Yeah, and as Jasmine said, there's that comment piece of the Jamboard. Feel free to put anything you want in there, anything about the 9-element plan. Of course, we're really focused on the vision and goals piece. We'd love to get your feedback. You know, this is critical to the planning process, and I'm very excited to get your input and feedback on these different pieces of the thing. All right, so now that's in the chat, right, Jasmine?
Yep.
Where did that go? Oh, there it is. Okay. So you can click on, oh, how long will the Jamboard link be open? Actually, that's a great question, Jasmine. How long can that link just sit out there and be open?
Yeah, so this link can stay open as long as you'd like. We can leave it, it'll definitely be open after this meeting if you have further comments or you change your mind. So you guys can determine how long you want to keep that open.
I would be inclined to keep it open for about 24 hours.
Great, yeah, you can do that.
Yeah. And I should say that concludes the formal portion of the meeting. There's no more to the presentation. Thank you all very much for attending, and please, continue to, go through that Jamboard exercise. But that's the end of the presentation. Jasmine, can I take control back from you now?
Yeah, I think I stopped sharing my screen, so you should be all
Okay.
set. Yeah, I'll give you the host privileges back too.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
All right. I just want to put up the, that's that, yeah. So you can send your comments and questions to the project email, scan9e@cnyrpdb.org. And, there's not a lot on the project website yet, but we're going to keep building as we go along. We're going to put the recording of this meeting on there. And, as we develop other pieces of this plan, that's where they'll show up.
Thanks, Aaron. This is Tony again. I'll hang on for a little while here. If folks have questions with whether doing the Jamboards or just have any other thoughts.